In Bilal Khan in Toronto, defence and security analyst, founder of Qua Defence News, and with a deep insight into Pakistani geopolitics. Welcome to the programme, Bilal. Let's talk about the importance of President Trump's favourite Field Marshal, General Munir, how he got there. What's the route to the fruit of his story?
So with General Asim Munir, he essentially rose on the top of a lot of political turmoil within Pakistan with the ouster of the Imran Khan government or the PTI government a few years ago. But with that, several major geopolitical situations had happened, not least the brief but very intense conflict between India and Pakistan last year around this time. And that helped essentially both propel him and the Pakistani security establishment to the fore. I mean, I think prior to that conflict, few had really paid a lot of attention to the Pakistan military as like an institution in the sense of like a war-fighting institution, one with a deep, military capability or, defense industry and what have you. But I think with that conflict, a lot of things came to the fore, and several other things that, sort of alerted the world to some changes that have been happening. For example, China's advancement in military technology, the interoperability between China and Pakistan during that conflict, and just the ability to, stave off India's attack at the time. So with that, Asim Munir rose on top, and he essentially consolidated a lot of power within the military itself, or at least seemingly so, through the Chief of Defense Forces institution or seat. Now he is essentially, for the first time in many years in Pakistan's history, the senior most military officer, technically overseeing the Army, Navy, and Air Force and strategic capabilities. So that puts him in a very powerful position. And when you add to the fact of his ISI pedigree, he's been in the region, obviously, by serving with the Pakistan military. So he knows the IRGC, he knows his neighbors, he knows all that. So that is essentially the infrastructure you could say that the U.S. is trying to lean on through Asim Munir, especially with the fact that since the start of the recent conflict with Iran, a lot of the IRGC senior leadership had been killed basically. So that leadership has fallen and devolved down to more junior officers who the world doesn't really know yet. I mean, yeah.
One thing that strikes me, because you've talked about kind of his military credentials, is the personality politics. I think I'm right in saying you go back to June, was it last year, around the 18th of June last year, there's a White House lunch put on. And the importance, and spell this out to us, this FaceTime that he had with President Trump, that Trump's kind of tune changed around him. He became this was the moment he started talking about, his favourite general, the favourite field marshal.
Yeah, I mean, certainly, I would say that General Asim Munir really understood and read the Trump administration exceptionally well. He understood that the way the second Trump administration was going to operate was through the White House, through a personality, through an individual, as opposed to the wider American institutions. And even those institutions that have traditionally worked with Pakistan, like the Defense Department, the State Department, they would actually follow through with, or rather work through Trump himself. So, you would notice that in the past, at the time of Obama and previous presidents, you would have the State Department, the U.S. Secretary of State really engaged with Pakistan, or even the Pentagon chiefs and what have you. But now it's through Trump and the White House. So Asim Munir read that, I would argue, really well, and essentially established a personal rapport.
And more than
with that, he was,
We talk about journalists who have the call to President Trump and by chance get through. It seems that he's having regular conversations on the mobile, face to face, perhaps more than other diplomats, other world leaders.
Absolutely. That's there for sure. And I would say that within this conflict in particular, I think Trump and his advisors recognize that a person like Asim Munir is arguably indispensable in the sense that if you need someone who is respected within the region by virtue of being the topmost officer within the Pakistani military, someone who obviously can direct both the military side and the political, or rather the foreign policy side of the country, as well as the fact that at the end of the day, he has those prior connections by virtue of the role that he's occupied within Pakistan itself for many years. With the key regional stakeholders, that this is someone you would want to talk to, and he can get it done, right? I mean, at the end of the day, there's no doubt traditionally or historically the Pakistani military had always maintained a strong, level of influence, let's say, within the political and foreign policy sphere of Pakistan. But today that is very apparent, and you can argue that really when it comes to foreign policy, national security, intelligence, all these things route through General Asim Munir. So in that sense, he is someone who is not just viewed as someone that Trump likes, but arguably you could say that, someone that Trump um, understands who, he is. He is he's a key actor within the region itself, and he is someone who's dependable and who can help the Americans achieve the relationships that they want to achieve with the current, Iranian leadership, basically.
Is he notably charismatic? Because you've talked about how effective he is. Do people speak within the ranks that he has a particular power? Because some of the things that you've suggested, you could say, well, he knows how to flatter, and that's what many world leaders have done. But if we compare that to perhaps Keir Starmer in the UK or European leaders, let's see the wrath of what happened. Often blame, look at the scenario we're looking at today with the Pentagon looking to punish NATO allies. It's kind of the inverse with Pakistan. What is it you think about Field Marshal Munir?
I mean, at one level, if you're an American policy leader, you would look at how he came into the position he's in, and the amount of, or rather, you can actually we could argue that one thing that maybe Asim Munir has in common with Trump is that Asim Munir wanted to, have reshaped how the structures and systems within Pakistan worked, so that they would work for him. So I think the biggest change you could argue is, for example, the chief of defense forces position that did not exist in that capacity in Pakistan. I mean, there'd been a joint chief of staff, and he was more of the senior most officer who nominally was the most, the one who would technically command the armed forces. But now you have an actual commander of the armed forces, which is, for the first time in Pakistan's history, you have one singular leader of the entire military, plus the nuclear, plus the intelligence, which is a very powerful position, on top of the many structural things within Pakistan, the way the military has always maintained a strong influence within the country's politics. So in that sense, the ability to shape the reality does speak to him. Yeah.
It's worth then saying that he's been given kind of the promotion after promotion in terms of his status has grown. And I'm wondering the correlation of his power since he's been made Trump's effective, quote, favourite field marshal that he has around him, the orbit around him in Pakistan. And I think it's often spoken of as a hybrid kind of military democratic regime which waxes and wanes. Because I also note the fact that he's been given immunity for life against prosecution, hasn't he?
Absolutely. It's within the Constitution itself. He is, actually, in addition to that, I would actually highlight that he actually occupies two military posts. So one is the Chief of Defense Forces, which is, you could say, the senior most commander of the entire armed forces. And then he's still the Chief of Army Staff. So he has basically been able to essentially maintain both a potentially permanent post, the Chief of Defense Forces one, and then also he still is the person who the army answers to directly as well for those on the ground operational matters. So he has shown that he is able to operate at multiple levels, and he's able to reshape how things work within Pakistan where they work for him. And on top of that, he is someone who can evidently get things done within that framework, and is equipped to do so. It's like he's not just necessarily giving empty promises. I think with the first ceasefire that came, the 2-week one, I think with that really propelled him to the top of America's, like, let's say, list of people to work with. I would argue that in that sense, it wasn't just, yes, many of the countries in the region have relationships with Arakshi and, the other older guard of the Iranian regime, but the new ones are a new player. They're new players, and no one knows who they are yet. We have one or two names, and they never showed up to the talks yet.
That is interesting.
So that being said, the fact is someone was able to convince these new people to agree to a ceasefire.
And that
I would
takes
argue that it was.
It's a very interesting point. I just wanted you to carry on with that, but I wanted to just add to that the fact that during that ceasefire, I think, am I right in saying that the Field Marshal was one of the first to go to Iran? Am I right? That it showed for President Trump, at least from the Iranian side, that he holds power and sway and key contacts on both sides. Give me a sense of the Iranian position and why they would see him as a go-to.
Yeah, so I mean, one thing I would caveat is that a lot of, most likely, even then this includes Asim Munir's relationships, was with the older regime people who obviously, they're the ones who rose in the ranks while he rose into the ranks in Pakistan, and many of them have died. So there are very few of those older guards left, right? And I think anyone in the region could have relationships with the older guard, like Turkey does, Oman evidently does. That's not the new factor. I think what it is that the U.S. is hoping is that Asim Munir, by virtue of his position, by his pedigree, by his authority, by Pakistan's position, all these factors would hopefully allow him to bring in the new IRGC leadership, the younger guard, into the fore. Right now, they have, through media reports, we've heard through different places that they're more hawkish, they're more reluctant to deal with the U.S. They have, they don't necessarily see eye to eye with Arachi and the older guard. So there are all these many like different intervening factors that have to be accounted for, and you need someone who is able to sort of get their trust. And I think the ceasefire was an indicator that, okay, he was able to get their trust up to a level, but now then the bigger challenge for Asim Munir is to say, okay, how can I, the way that, back in the 70s, Pakistan helped the U.S. establish relations with China. It's very similar in the sense, how can you establish a link between a new, somewhat nebulous, somewhat unclear group of leaders with the United States? Because the United States needs, at this point, to establish that, they want to negotiate with the people who are going to be there for the long run.
Bill, a quick thought.
The ones who,
a brief thought from you on this, which is, we're talking about the significance, the agency that he has, the power, the connecting ability he has. Are we overplaying? Just basically, if we subtracted subtracted Asim Munir, the field marshal, from these talks, do you think they'd still be taking place at such a cadence, with such momentum in Pakistan?
I mean, it depends on how the nature of the conflict and all these things would have gone, but I think the talks would have still taken place in Pakistan by a few structural issues. For one thing, there's no doubt that Israel was a very, let's say, impactful contributing factor to driving this conflict. And any land or country which is within Israel's, let's say, physical reach or intelligence reach or economic reach, like for example, Turkey, very powerful country, strong diplomatic pedigree, all that stuff. But at the end of the day, would a younger IRGC leader be comfortable going to Turkey, given his relationship with Israel? So I think there are structural realities that would have allowed Pakistan to win a place for such talks. But I think where you would want to give credit to Asim Munir and the current government is the fact that they have been seen as somewhat as stewards and leaders in that. Like they have sort of position themselves as the people who are just more than hosts, but also you could say taskmasters of the situation, who are trying to wrangle in the different parties who seem to, at one level argue against each other and have constantly coming to the table and leaving the table, and they're sort of in the middle there, essentially trying to keep things moving along.
Yes.
So yeah.
Bilal, really good to talk to you. Thank you for your time today. Bilal Khan in Toronto, Defence and Security Analyst, founder of Quad Defence News, with a deep, as you could hear and see, insight into Pakistani geopolitics.